The morning of my 70th birthday began as usual, with a cup of strong tea without sugar and oatmeal. Even on a day like this, I didn't stray from the habits I had developed over decades. I got up with the first rays of the sun, as I had done all my life when I worked as a primary school teacher at the only school in Kendallville. My small house on the outskirts of town was spotless. I ironed the snow-white tablecloth that I only took out of the dresser for special occasions. The silver cutlery I inherited from my mother sparkled after being carefully polished. The porcelain dinner service my husband had given me for our 20th wedding anniversary, a few months before his sudden death, had been washed and laid out on the dining table. I didn't want any celebration. It seemed ridiculous to me to throw a party because I was a year closer to the grave. But my daughter Martha insisted, "Mom, 70 is not just a birthday, it's a milestone." I gave in, as I had often done in recent years. I had never let my children get their way before, but with age I had become softer, more yielding, although I sometimes regretted it. Looking in the bathroom mirror, I critically examined my face. Deep wrinkles around my eyes, tight lips that seemed to have lost the habit of smiling forever. I had always considered myself unattractive, but over the years my face had acquired what some called character, and what I called the traces of life. My gray hair was pulled back into a tight bun at the nape of my neck, a hairstyle I had worn since I was 30, when I buried my husband and was left alone with 3 children. Sometimes I wondered how my life would have turned out if Raymond hadn't died of a heart attack at 42. Perhaps I wouldn't have become so tough, so principled. But fate had other plans, and I had to become the backbone of my family, an iron lady who didn't allow herself any weakness. A sudden ring of the phone interrupted my thoughts. It was Martha, calling to see if I needed any help before the guests arrived. I replied that everything was ready and reminded my daughter not to forget to bring extra chairs. In our family, it was customary to manage on our own without asking for help from others. "We don't hire people to do what we can do ourselves," I often repeated this phrase to my children. After talking to my daughter, I went back to my preparations. I took an apple pie out of the oven, my signature dish, a recipe I got from my grandmother. The smell of cinnamon and vanilla filled the kitchen, bringing back memories of my childhood, of a time when everything seemed simple and understandable. In 2 hours, the guests were supposed to start arriving. Martha and her husband Paul and their daughter Allison, my son Warren and his wife Thelma, and their children Quentin and Ashley. A few more distant relatives with whom I maintained relations more out of a sense of duty than affection. The thought of Quentin made me sigh heavily. My eldest grandson had always been my favorite, although I had never admitted it out loud. As a child, he often stayed with me on weekends, helping in the garden and listening to my stories about the past. Quentin was a sensitive boy, but over the years he had developed a hardness that worried me. I blame myself for this in part. Perhaps I had been too strict with him, as I was with everyone in my family. Our relationship became particularly strained after Quentin separated from his wife, Bryn. I had grown very fond of my daughter-in-law and made no secret of my disappointment in my grandson's decision. "You're making a mistake, Quentin. Bryn is a wonderful girl and you won't find anyone better," I told him at the time. But he just waved it off, saying that I didn't understand modern relationships. "We're just different people, Grandma. Not all marriages are made in heaven like yours and Grandpa's." Those words hurt me. Quentin didn't know what I had gone through to keep my family together after my husband's death. He only saw the outside, a strong woman who had overcome adversity and raised 3 children on her own. But he didn't know about the sleepless nights, the fear, the moments of despair when I thought I couldn't go on. I continued to maintain a relationship with Bryn after the divorce, despite my family's disapproval. We met once a month at a cafe in the city center, and I always listened with interest to my former sister-in-law's stories about the little cafe she had opened after her breakup with Quentin. "It's my dream, Eudora. Small, but mine," Bryn would say with a sparkle in her eyes. Warren was the first to arrive. My youngest son had always been punctual to a fault, another trait he inherited from me. Tall, thin, with receding hair, even though he wasn't yet 50, he looked like Raymond. The same reserve, the same habit of thinking about every word before he spoke. Happy birthday, Mom, he said, handing me a neatly wrapped box. I knew there was a silk scarf inside. Warren always gave me scarves for my birthday, and I always put them in the top drawer of my dresser, never wearing them. It was our unspoken ritual, part of the strange relationship that had developed between us over the decades. Martha and her family arrived next. Unlike Warren, who was reserved, Martha was emotional and boisterous. She burst into the house like a whirlwind, hugging me, admiring the food, and bossing her husband around as he carried boxes of gifts and extra chairs. "You look wonderful, Mom," Martha exclaimed, even though we both knew it wasn't true. I looked the way a woman my age should look, tired of life. But in our family, it was customary to say nice things to each other on holidays, even if they were blatant lies. Gradually, the house filled with guests. Nieces with their husbands, cousins, my neighbor Gladys, who I had been friends with for 30 years. The only ones missing were Quentin and Ashley, Warren's children. Ashley had warned that she would be late from work and would arrive later, but Quentin had been late for family gatherings a lot lately, if he showed up at all. The guests gathered in the living room, exchanging news, discussing politics, health, the weather, the usual topics for such gatherings. I accepted congratulations, opened gifts, and thanked people as expected, even though I had no use for most of the things. Another vase, another box, another book I would never read. But I smiled and said, "How nice," or "That's just what I needed, because that's what you do." At 6:30, when everyone was seated at the table and Martha began to serve the soup, Quentin appeared. His arrival did not go unnoticed. He slammed the front door loudly without taking off his shoes and walked into the dining room, where everyone turned silently in his direction. "Sorry I'm late," he said with that special intonation that made it clear he wasn't sorry at all. I noticed that his movements were slightly unsteady and his eyes were shining unnaturally. I knew immediately that my grandson had been drinking before coming to see me. Quentin, seemingly oblivious to the general silence, came over to me, leaned down, and kissed me casually on the cheek. He smelled of whiskey and cigarettes, a smell I had always hated. "Happy birthday, Grandma," he said, and plopped down on the empty chair next to his sister Ashley, who looked at him with obvious disapproval. Warren cleared his throat, a sound that in our family meant discontent. But no one said anything. Dinner continued as if nothing had happened. The conversation at the table became strained, everyone carefully avoiding looking at Quentin, who ate little but drank a lot, filling his glass with wine from a bottle he had brought with him. "How's your restaurant, Quentin?" I asked, trying to lighten the mood. The Prentice Grill was his grandson's pride and joy, his first serious business venture after several years working as a chef in various establishments in Kendallville. Quentin grunted. "It's okay. It could be better if some people weren't trying to undermine me." "What are you talking about?" asked Paul, Martha's husband, who always tried to keep the conversation going, even when everyone else would have preferred to remain silent. "My ex, of course," Quentin replied, taking another sip of wine. "She opened a cafe 3 blocks from my restaurant. Coincidence? I don't think so." I frowned. "Bryn has every right to open her business wherever she wants. Kendallville isn't that big of a town." "Of course you're defending her," Quentin snapped. "You're best friends. I wonder what she told you about me." "We don't discuss you," I replied calmly, although that wasn't entirely true. Bryn sometimes mentioned Quentin, but always in a restrained manner, without the bitterness my grandson was now displaying. "Come on," Quentin said, looking at me mockingly. "I bet she told you the story about how I shattered her dreams, right? How I didn't support her, how I was a terrible husband. Classic." "We're not going to discuss this now," Warren intervened, looking sternly at his son. "It's Grandma's birthday." "When are we going to discuss this, Dad?" Quentin raised his voice. "When are we going to discuss the fact that my own family is in a relationship with a woman who is trying to destroy my business?" "Bryn isn't trying to destroy your business," I objected. She's just what?" Quentin interrupted me, his face red with anger and alcohol. "Just happened to choose the same direction in cooking? Just happened to poach my clients? Just happened to spread rumors that I use cheap ingredients?" "Quentin, calm down." Ashley put her hand on her brother's shoulder, but he shook her off. No, I won't calm down. I want to know why my own grandmother continues to see a woman who hates me. I felt my patience wearing thin. All my life, I had tried to keep my emotions in check, not let anger get the better of me. But now, looking at my drunk grandson making a scene in my house on my birthday, I felt something inside me break. Bryn doesn't speak ill of you, Quentin, I said quietly but firmly. She's not that kind of person. And she's not trying to ruin your business. She's just trying to build her own. And if she's doing better than you, maybe you should think about why, instead of blaming everyone else. The table fell silent. I had never spoken so harshly to any of my grandchildren. I saw the shock on their faces, but I couldn't stop. Years of pent-up disappointment burst forth. You know what your problem is, Quentin? You always look for someone to blame. When you failed your college exams, you blamed your teachers. When you got fired from the Hampton Inn, you blamed the manager. And now that your marriage is falling apart, you blame Bryn. Maybe it's time you took a look in the mirror. Quentin jumped to his feet, his chair crashing to the floor. You don't know anything about my life, he shouted. You sit in your perfect little house, judging everyone from your moral high ground, but you have no idea what I've been through. Quentin, sit down. Warren tried to intervene, but his son ignored him. You always loved her more than me, Quentin continued, leaning toward me. From the very beginning, as soon as I brought her into the house, you looked at her like she was some kind of treasure. And me? I was never good enough for you. I stood up to be at the same level as my grandson. That's not true, Quentin. I've always loved you, but Bryn doesn't deserve the way you treated her. She's a good girl who— Shut up! Quentin barked, and I felt a sharp pain in my chest as his hand pushed me away. Taken by surprise, I lost my balance and fell, hitting the edge of the table hard on my side. For a moment, there was deafening silence. Then I heard Martha's frightened cry and the sound of chairs being pulled back. Warren and Paul rushed over to help me up. I saw the horror on Quentin's face, who seemed to only now realize what he had done. Grandma, I didn't mean to, he began, but Warren interrupted him. Get out, now. I expected someone to stand up for Quentin, to say it was an accident, that he didn't mean to hurt me. But no one said a word. Everyone stared at their plates, avoiding eye contact with each other. Mom, you need to lie down. Martha tried to take my arm, but I pulled away. I'm fine, I said, even though I felt a sharp pain in my side. Let's continue with dinner. But the holiday was hopelessly ruined. Quentin muttered something that sounded like an apology and ran out of the house. The other guests soon began to leave, citing the late hour or urgent business. Only Martha and Warren and their families remained to help clear the table and wash the dishes. When everyone had left, I sat down in my favorite armchair in the living room, staring at the uneaten birthday cake. The pain in my side had dulled, but the bitterness and resentment remained. It wasn't so much because of the fall. At my age, bruises are not uncommon, as because no one had come to my defense. They all just sat there and watched as my own grandson insulted me and then pushed me. I always thought that family was the people who would support you no matter what. But today I realized that wasn't true. My family, the people I had sacrificed everything for, weren't willing to sacrifice even their comfort for me. The ringing of the phone interrupted my dark thoughts. It was Bryn, who wanted to wish me a happy birthday, unaware of what had happened. Her warm, sincere voice was such a contrast to the coldness I felt from my own family. Eudora, I wanted to stop by today, but I thought you might be busy with your family, she said. You can come by tomorrow, I replied, surprised at how calm my voice sounded. I'd love to see you. After hanging up, I sat in silence for a long time, thinking about Quentin's words. Maybe he was right? Maybe I really did always treat Bryn better than him? No, that wasn't it. I loved my grandson, but I couldn't approve of his behavior. And Bryn was exactly the kind of girl I wanted to be when I was young. Independent, determined, brave. The week after my birthday dragged on forever. The bruise on my side gradually changed color from bright purple to yellowish green, reminding me of what had happened every time I changed clothes or took a shower. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the bitterness I felt at my family's behavior. During those 7 days, no one except Martha even called to ask how I was feeling, and my daughter called more out of habit than out of genuine concern. The conversation was short and strained. Martha studiously avoided mentioning Quentin, and I didn't ask. My grandson didn't show up or call, but I didn't expect him to. Bryn came by the day after the holiday as we had agreed. I didn't tell her what had happened. I didn't want to make her feel uncomfortable. But she noticed how I winced when I turned too sharply and asked me directly. I lied that I had just fallen awkwardly, tripping over the carpet. Bryn didn't seem to believe me, but she didn't press the issue. We spent a pleasant evening drinking tea and eating the leftover birthday cake, talking about everything except Quentin. On Wednesday, I was called to the bank to sign some papers for a deposit. I didn't want to leave the house, but I had things to do. I got dressed slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements. My side still hurt, especially in the morning. The bank was in the center of Kendallville, 3 blocks from my house. I usually walk there in 15 minutes, but today I walked slower than usual. It was surprisingly warm for early October. The golden leaves of the maple trees lining the street rustled under my feet. I had always loved autumn, the time when nature prepares for rest, gradually slowing down its rhythm. Perhaps it was because autumn had come to my own life. The bank was not very crowded. The young clerk, whose name I always forgot, smiled at me warmly and showed me into a separate office. He said something about interest rates and new deposit terms, but I listened half-heartedly, mechanically signing the papers where he pointed. My thoughts were far away. After finishing the formalities, I opened my purse to put away the signed documents and noticed a crumpled lottery ticket peeking out of my wallet. I had completely forgotten about it. It was a weekly state lottery ticket that I had bought at the grocery store 3 days before my birthday. I don't usually buy lottery tickets. I consider it a waste of money. But that day, the cashier was so insistent, so convinced that it was a lucky ticket, that I gave in and paid $2 just to get rid of her. I turned the ticket over in my hands, wondering if the drawing had already taken place. I think so. They said something about it on TV over the weekend, but I didn't pay attention. After leaving the bank, I bought a local newspaper at a newsstand on the corner. The lottery results were always published on the last page. I usually skimmed over that page without stopping, but today I carefully studied the table with the winning numbers from last Saturday. At first, I couldn't believe my eyes. I reread the numbers again. Then again, more slowly, checking each digit. There was no doubt. All 6 numbers on my ticket matched the winning numbers. I felt my heart start to beat faster. In the jackpot amount column was a number that took my breath away. $1,600,000. I had to sit down on the nearest bench. My hands were shaking slightly as I took the ticket out of my wallet again and checked the numbers. But there could be no mistake. I, Eudora Prentice, had won the jackpot. Strangely, instead of rejoicing, I felt a kind of emptiness inside. There was no joy, just a slight dizziness and the thought, what now? Gradually, my ability to think rationally returned. I carefully folded the ticket, hid it in the most secure compartment of my wallet, and headed home. On the way, I bought another newspaper, a different edition, to double-check the numbers. The result was the same. At home, I locked all the doors, took the box where I kept important documents out of the closet, and carefully placed the ticket inside. Then I sat down in a chair and stared out the window for a long time. Nothing had changed outside. The same old maple tree in the yard, the same neighbors' houses. But inside me, something shifted, as if a huge chunk of ice had cracked and begun to melt slowly. The newspaper had information for the winners. If you have won more than $5,000, please contact the regional lottery office at... This was followed by an address in Fort Wayne and a phone number. The next morning, I called the number. A pleasant female voice explained the procedure for claiming the prize. I had to come in person with the ticket and my documents. The prize was exactly as stated in the newspaper, $1,600,000 before taxes. After federal and local taxes were deducted, the amount was reduced by about 30%, but it was still huge. I chose a lump sum payment instead of annual payments. At my age, it would be presumptuous to expect a long life. The lottery employee warned me that the verification and processing would take about a week and asked if I wanted a public check presentation ceremony. as is customary with large winnings. No, I replied firmly. No publicity. That's your right, she agreed. But I must warn you that your name will still be made public. We are required by law to publish the names of the winners. I understand, I said, but no photos or interviews, please. After the conversation, I felt strangely empty. I was about to become rich. For the first time in my life, I would have enough money to buy anything I wanted. But at 70, material desires no longer have the same power they do when you're young. A big house, a fancy car, expensive clothes, it all seemed so meaningless. On Friday, I went to Fort Wayne. The lottery office was a modest building in the business district of the city. The verification and registration process took almost 3 hours. I was photographed for internal documentation, copies of all my documents were made, and my fingerprints were taken. The employees were polite, but they treated me with the kind of caution you usually reserve for elderly people, as if I might break down at any moment or forget why I was there. Finally, they handed me a document confirming my winnings and explained that the money would be transferred to my bank account within 10 business days. I was also introduced to a financial advisor who gave me standard advice on how to manage a large sum of money. I listened politely, but deep down I knew I wouldn't take his advice. I had my own plans for the money, or rather, they were starting to take shape. On the bus ride home, I never drove. I reflected on the strangeness of the situation. All my life, I had saved every dollar, putting it aside for a rainy day that never came. And now, as my life was coming to an end, fate had presented me with this gift. Or perhaps it was a mockery. When I got off the bus in Kendallville, I decided to take a walk through the town center. I wanted to be among people, listen to snippets of conversation, watch ordinary life go on, unaware of my unexpected wealth. Passing by the main square, I saw a familiar figure coming out of the town hall. Bryn. She was walking quickly, her head down, and she looked upset. I called out to her and she turned around, struggling to focus her gaze as if returning from deep thought. Eudora? A smile appeared on her face, but her eyes remained sad. What a surprise! What are you doing downtown? Just walking, I replied. And you? Why did you come to City Hall? Bryn sighed. Trying to get a permit to expand the cafe, but as usual, it's all red tape and bureaucracy. They want additional documents, approvals, expert opinions. It's as if I'm planning to build a nuclear power plant, not just add a few tables. We walked down the street together. Bryn told me about her difficulties with the cafe, and I listened attentively. Her small establishment, Bryn's, was located on the corner of Main Street and Oak Avenue, a couple of blocks from Quentin's restaurant. It was a cozy place with 6 tables and a small bar. Bryn cooked, served customers, and did the bookkeeping herself. Her only assistant was an elderly woman who came in for a couple of hours a day to wash the dishes. You see, I have a chance to rent the space next door, Bryn explained. It became available a month ago when the antique shop closed. I could expand the cafe, hire staff, and diversify the menu. I have so many ideas. What's stopping you? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Money, of course, Bryn shrugged. Rent, repairs, equipment, permits, licenses. I figure it'll cost at least $100,000. I don't have that kind of money, and the bank won't give me a loan without serious collateral or guarantors. We stopped at the window of her cafe. Through the glass, I could see a few customers, an elderly couple and a woman with a child, sitting at tables enjoying coffee and pastries. The place was cozy, but cramped. I dream of opening a real restaurant, Bryn continued, looking at her cafe with a mixture of pride and sadness. Not just a place to drink coffee and eat a sandwich, but an establishment with a special atmosphere and an interesting menu, where people would come not only to eat, but also to spend time. I even came up with a name, Holloway. It's my grandmother's surname. She taught me how to cook. At that moment, something clicked in my head. The plan that had been vaguely forming since I won suddenly took shape. $1,600,000. Enough to change not only my life, but also Bryn's, and more importantly, Quentin's life. Bryn, I said slowly, what if you had the money to expand? What would you do first? She looked at me in surprise. I don't know. I'd probably rent the space next door right away before someone else snatched it up. Then I'd commission a renovation project. I have an architect friend who's already sketched some ideas, just for fun. What about the competition? I asked cautiously. There aren't many people in Kendallville who can afford to eat out regularly. The market is limited. Bryn shook her head. I'm not going to compete with Prentice Grill. Quentin has his niche, steaks, ribs, typical American cuisine. I want to create something completely different. Mediterranean cuisine, light dishes, lots of vegetables, fish. There's nothing like that in our town. I looked at her intently. Young, energetic, full of ideas. That's how I used to be before life taught me caution and compromise. And what did I get in the end? A family that doesn't respect me, children who don't care about me, a grandson who raised his hand to me, and now I have a chance to change everything. Not for myself. It's too late for me. But maybe for Bryn, and at the same time show Quentin that his actions have consequences. Bryn, I said firmly, I need to have a serious talk with you. But not here. Come to my place tomorrow evening, say around 7, and be prepared for a long conversation. She looked puzzled, but agreed. We parted at the corner of Main Street, and I walked slowly home, thinking over the details of my plan. With every step, it became clearer, more real. Yes, it was risky. Yes, some would call it revenge. But for me, it was justice, and perhaps a chance to leave something meaningful behind. At home, I took an old folder out of the closet. It contained the house documents, insurance policies, and my will. Now it was time to make some changes. Serious changes. I picked up a pen and started jotting things down. Investment, partnership, business shares, terms and conditions. I had never been in business, but I had always been a practical person and understood the basics. By evening, the plan was ready. I would invest money in Bryn's restaurant, not as a gift, but as an investment. I would become her partner. We would turn the small cafe into the best restaurant in Kendallville. And when it became successful, when it started turning a profit, well, then Quentin would realize that he had lost not only his wife, but also the grandmother who had always been on his side. And maybe that would be a lesson for him. As I fell asleep that night, I felt something like anticipation for the first time in a long time. Not happiness. I had long forgotten what that was. But a sense of purpose, of direction. I had a plan for revenge, and now I was going to put it into action. I spent the whole day preparing for my conversation with Bryn. The kitchen was filled with the aroma of fresh baking. I had made a plum pie using my mother's recipe. It wasn't just a treat, it was a kind of symbol. In our family, deals were always sealed over food, whether it was buying a house or giving a daughter away in marriage. My mother used to say, a good meal softens hearts and opens wallets. Today, I was about to open not a wallet, but a bank account, and I hoped my mother's pie would be enough. Once upon a time, it seems like in another life, I dreamed of opening my own bakery. I loved creating something with my own hands, seeing how ordinary flour turned into a crispy crust, how the dough rose, filling the house with warmth and comfort. But then Raymond died, and all my dreams had to be put on hold. 3 children and a mortgage left no room for fantasies. I got a job as an elementary school teacher, a stable job with a decent pension. It wasn't what I dreamed of, but it was what my family needed. And now, at 70, I have a chance to fulfill someone else's dream, if not my own. Bryn was talented. I saw it in her baking, in the sauces she made for family dinners when she was married to Quentin. She put her heart into every dish, experimented, wasn't afraid to make mistakes. Things I had always lacked. The doorbell rang exactly 7 times. Bryn was punctual as always. She stood in the doorway with a bottle of wine in her hands, slightly embarrassed and clearly intrigued. I hope this will go well with dinner, she said, handing me the bottle. Perfect, I replied, even though I knew almost nothing about wine. Raymond loved a good red, but since his death, I had mostly drunk tea. Come in, everything's ready. We sat down at the table in the living room. I covered it with my best tablecloth and took out the porcelain plates that usually gathered dust in the cupboard. Bryn noticed, but said nothing. She was always tactful. At first, the conversation was about trivial things. The weather, the latest news from Kendallville, the health of mutual acquaintances. I was in no hurry to move on to the main topic. I needed to gauge Bryn's mood, to understand how ready she was for what I was about to propose. Yesterday, you mentioned your plans to expand the cafe, I finally began as we started dessert. Tell me more. What exactly do you want to do? Bryn perked up. Her eyes lit up as she began to describe her vision. She talked about a light, airy atmosphere, a Mediterranean menu with an emphasis on local produce, and a wine list she'd been compiling for months, studying varieties and regions. You know, there's never been a really good restaurant in Kendallville, she said, gesturing with an enthusiasm that was impossible to miss. We have diners, we have a couple of family restaurants, we have Quentin's Prentice Grill with its steaks and barbecue, but there's nowhere to go for a special experience, for dishes that don't just fill you up but surprise and inspire you. I listened, watching her face change as she talked about her dream. At moments like this, she was especially beautiful. Not the superficial beauty that magazines glorify, but the kind that comes from within, from passion and enthusiasm. What about the competition? I asked, deliberately touching on a sore subject. Quentin won't be happy if you open a restaurant that takes his customers away. Bryn's face darkened slightly. I don't want any conflict, she said quietly. But I'm not going to give up my dream because I'm afraid of my ex-husband. After all, Kendallville isn't that small. There's room for 2 different restaurants here. She paused, staring into her teacup, then looked up at me. I was in Quentin's shadow for a long time. When we were married, he thought all my ideas, all my recipes weren't good enough, weren't original enough. He always knew better. He's the chef after all. And I'm just a girl who likes to cook. That's what he said. There was no bitterness in her voice, only exhaustion. I knew that feeling all too well. Tired of not being taken seriously, of having your talents and abilities devalued by those who should support you the most. Bryn, I said, deciding the moment had come. I have a proposal. A business proposal. She looked surprised. Business? Yes. I want to invest in your restaurant. Bryn froze with the cup at her lips, not bringing it to her mouth. What? You heard me. I want to be your business partner. I'll provide the capital to expand, to transform Bryn's into the restaurant you've always dreamed of. But you don't have that kind of money, she said, confused. I smiled, savoring the moment. Now I do. I won the lottery. I told her about the ticket, about winning, about how I had gone to Fort Wayne to file the paperwork. Bryn listened with her mouth open, unable to believe her ears. $1,600,000? She repeated. That's incredible. But why would you invest it in my restaurant? You could travel, buy a new house, help your children. My children. The ones who didn't even call to see how I was feeling after my birthday? I couldn't hide the bitterness in my voice. No, Bryn. I want to invest this money in something worthwhile, in your dream, in our business together. I saw the emotions change in her eyes, disbelief, hope, doubt, hope again. But why? Why me? I took her hand. Her fingers were warm and trembling slightly. Because you're talented. Because you deserve a chance to prove it. And because... I hesitated, wondering how honest to be, because I need to feel that I've done something meaningful in my twilight years. That I didn't just live my life raising children who grew up and forgot about me, but that I created something that will live on after me. It was the truth, though not the whole truth. I didn't mention my main motive, my desire to get revenge on Quentin for his betrayal, for the blow that still hurt in my side and in my heart. But Bryn didn't need to know that. At least not yet. I don't know what to say, she finally said. This is a very generous offer. But I can't just take that kind of money. You don't have to, I interrupted her. This isn't a gift, Bryn. It's an investment. I'll be your partner. We'll share the risks and the profits. I'll put in the money, you put in your talent and energy. It's a fair deal. I could see her eyes light up with interest. She liked the business approach better than the idea of charity. Bryn had always been independent and wasn't used to accepting handouts. What are your terms? She asked bluntly. I took a sheet of paper with my plan sketched out from a folder on the table next to me. First, we're changing the name. Bryn's sounds like a cafe. We need something more sophisticated. Holloway, she said without hesitation. I've been thinking about that for a long time in honor of my grandmother. Holloway is a great name, I agreed. Second, I'm putting in $300,000 as startup capital. That should cover the rent for the neighboring space, renovations, equipment, initial staff costs, and advertising. In exchange, I get 40% of the business. Bryn nodded, considering the figures. That's fair, she said. What else? Third, you retain complete creative control. The menu, the interior, the staff, all of that is your responsibility. I won't interfere in those matters. What will you interfere in? She asked with a slight smile. The financial ones. I want to see monthly reports, know where the money is going, what the return on investment is. I'm not a businesswoman, but after 40 years as a teacher, I've learned to count every dollar. Bryn laughed. Fair enough. Anything else? Yes. One last thing. I paused, searching for the right words. We're not hiding my involvement in the project. I don't want to be a silent partner. I want everyone to know that Holloway is our joint venture. Yours and mine. Bryn frowned, instantly picking up on the subtext. You want Quentin to know that you've invested in my restaurant. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Yes, I replied honestly. I want him to know. She pushed her cup aside and stood up, walking over to the window. She stood there silently for a moment, looking out at the darkening garden. I didn't rush her, giving her time to think. Do you know what happened on your birthday? She asked suddenly without turning around. I tensed. How did you... Ashley told me. She called me the next day, very upset. She said Quentin had been horrible, that he pushed you and you fell. I was silent, not knowing what to say. So Ashley wasn't indifferent after all. At least she called Bryn. I suspected something had happened when I saw you wincing in pain, Bryn continued. But I didn't want to pressure you. I thought you'd tell me if you wanted to. She turned to me, and I saw determination in her eyes. I accept your offer, Eudora. Not just because it's a chance to fulfill my dream, but because you deserve better than what you got from your family. And if Quentin finds out you're my partner, well, it'll be fair. I felt something warm spread through my chest. It wasn't triumph or schadenfreude, but something more complex. A mixture of gratitude, relief, and quiet joy that I wasn't alone in my feelings. Then it's a deal? I asked, holding out my hand. It's a deal. Bryn shook my hand firmly. Partners. We spent the rest of the evening discussing the details. Bryn showed me some sketches that her architect friend had done just for fun, for a dream project. The interior was Mediterranean in style. Light wood, white walls, azure accents, lots of live plants. An open kitchen so guests could see the cooking process. A bar with high stools for those who came alone or just wanted a glass of wine. The main dining room has comfortable tables arranged to create a sense of privacy, even when the restaurant is full. Here's a sample menu, Bryn said, pulling a worn notebook from her bag. I write down all the ideas for dishes that come to mind. I flip through the pages, looking at the neat recipe notes, comments, and sometimes even little drawings illustrating how the dishes were served. It was clear that this notebook wasn't just a collection of recipes, but a kind of dream journal that Bryn had been nurturing for years. That's impressive, I said sincerely. You've really put a lot of thought into this. I've been thinking about it since I opened the cafe, Bryn admitted. But I never believed I could make these plans a reality, at least not in the next few years. Now you can, I said, closing the notebook and handing it back to her. We can start tomorrow. First, we need to secure the lease on the neighboring space. And find a good lawyer to draw up our partnership agreement, Bryn added practically. Of course, everything has to be legal. We discussed the practical details for a while longer. Then Bryn got ready to go home. At the door, she suddenly turned around and gave me a big hug. Thank you, Eudora. You have no idea what this means to me. I awkwardly patted her on the back. I wasn't used to such displays of emotion, but now it seemed appropriate. Just don't let me down, I said half-jokingly. I won't, she replied seriously. I promise. After Bryn left, I sat in my chair for a long time, thinking about our conversation. The deal was done. Now it was time to put the plan into action. And although I tried to convince myself that I was doing this primarily to support a talented young woman, deep down, I knew the truth. This was revenge. A sophisticated, well-thought-out revenge against a man who had betrayed my trust, who had raised his hand against me and never apologized. I imagined Quentin's face when he found out that his grandmother had become his ex-wife's business partner, and I couldn't help but smile. The next few weeks flew by in a whirlwind of activity. I couldn't remember the last time I felt so alive. Every day was filled with decisions, meetings, new experiences. First, Bryn and I hired a lawyer, a young but serious guy from Fort Wayne who specialized in small businesses. He drew up a partnership agreement, which we both carefully reviewed and signed. Then we signed a lease for the space next door to the cafe, a former antique store that had been vacant for 2 months. The owner of the building, an elderly man named Harold Fletcher, was happy to have a long-term tenant and even lowered the price a little when he heard about our plans. "The town needs new places," he said as he signed the contract. "Otherwise, everyone goes to Fort Wayne for a decent dinner." Then came the meetings with the architect and interior designer. A friend of Bryn's, Zachary Tate, turned out to be a talented young professional who enthusiastically took on the project. He refined the preliminary sketches, took all our wishes into account, and drew up a detailed renovation plan. "We'll combine the 2 rooms to create one open space," he explained, showing us the drawings. "We'll knock down the interior wall, leaving only the load-bearing columns. We'll expand the kitchen and make it partially open. The bar will be here, the main room will be here, and in the back, there will be several booths for those who prefer privacy." Bryn beamed with happiness as she looked at the plans. I was pleased too. The design looked elegant, but not pretentious, just right for Kendallville. Sophisticated enough to attract those who usually went out to dinner in Fort Wayne, but not so much that it would scare away the locals. The interior designer, Haley Morris, suggested a Mediterranean-inspired palette of white, azure, and sand with terracotta accents, natural materials, lots of light, and live plants. The furniture was commissioned from a local craftsman, Edward Cooper, whose pieces were renowned for their durability and beauty. It was more expensive than buying ready-made furniture, but the quality was worth it. While the preparations were underway, Bryn worked on the menu. She held several tastings for us and a small group of friends, experimenting with recipes and perfecting each dish. I wasn't a foodie, but even I could appreciate how exquisite her creations were. I especially liked the baked sea bass with herbs and lemon, a simple but incredibly delicious dish. "The secret is in the freshness of the ingredients," Bryn explained. "I've arranged with local farmers to supply us with fruits and vegetables. We'll have fish delivered from Chicago 3 times a week. Yes, it will increase our expenses, but the quality is worth it." I trusted her completely in these matters. My role was limited to the financial side of things. I kept track of the budget, approved expenses, and negotiated payment terms with suppliers. It turned out I had a talent for this kind of thing. Decades of managing the family budget had taught me to be practical and attentive to detail. News of our partnership quickly spread throughout Kendallville. It's a small town, everyone knows everything. I heard whispers behind my back when I went shopping and noticed curious glances at church on Sundays. No one dared to ask directly, but everyone was discussing my winnings and my decision to invest in my grandson's ex-wife's restaurant. My daughter Martha called a week after the renovation work began. She was the only one in the family who had kept in touch with me after the incident at the birthday party. "Mom, is it true?" she asked without preamble. "Are you investing money in Bryn's business?" "Yes," I replied calmly. "We're partners." "But why? Do you understand how this looks? Like a betrayal of Quentin. And what did he do, I wonder, when he pushed me away at my own birthday party? Wasn't that betrayal?" I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. Martha was silent for a few seconds. "He didn't mean it, Mom. He was drunk, upset." "And that's an excuse?" "He didn't even apologize, Martha. None of you stood up for me. You all sat there and watched as your drunk relative insulted and pushed a 70-year-old woman." Silence again, then a heavy sigh. "I'm not calling to argue, Mom. Just be careful. Quentin is very upset. He takes it as a personal betrayal." "Let him take it however he wants," I snapped. "I don't care." But that was a lie. I did care. I wanted him to be upset. I wanted him to feel at least some of the pain and humiliation I had felt. Martha didn't bring it up again, and we talked about trivial things for a while before saying goodbye. After our conversation, I felt strangely empty. Part of me wanted to make peace with my family, to restore the relationship we had before. But another part, a stronger part, craved justice. And that part won. The renovation work progressed quickly. A month after signing the partnership agreement, the wall between the two rooms was torn down, the space was combined, and the finishing work began. I came to the construction site every day, watched the progress, and discussed details with Bryn, the architect, and the builders. I enjoyed being at the center of things, making decisions, and seeing our plan come to life. One day, while I was inspecting the work, one of the builders approached me with a question about materials for the bar counter. We were standing in the middle of the future restaurant hall, discussing the advantages of different types of wood, when I noticed a familiar figure standing in the doorway. Quentin. He stood motionless, staring at us. Even from a distance, I could see how tense his shoulders were, how clenched his fists were. Our eyes met across the dusty construction site, and I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Schadenfreude, fear, sadness. My grandson, whom I once loved more than anything, was now looking at me with undisguised hostility. A moment later, he turned and walked away without saying a word. I continued my conversation with the builder as if nothing had happened, but inside I was trembling. The confrontation I had been waiting for and dreading deep down was inevitably approaching. But for now, I didn't want to think about it. We had work to do, to turn Bryn's dream into reality. And with each passing day, that reality was getting closer. New walls, new windows, a new life growing out of the old space. The metaphor did not escape my attention. I found a new purpose in life, a new meaning. And even though my initial motive was revenge, now there was something else. A desire to create something beautiful, something meaningful, something that would remain after me and bring joy to people for many years to come. 2 months flew by like a single day. The renovation was completed a week later than planned, but the result exceeded all expectations. Holloway looked exactly as Bryn and I had dreamed. Elegant but unpretentious, cozy but tasteful. White walls with textured plaster, wooden beams on the ceiling, and soft lighting created a warm atmosphere. An open kitchen behind a glass partition allowed guests to watch the food being prepared. A dark wood bar with tall stools beckoned those who came for a glass of wine and a bite to eat. In the main dining room, 20 tables were arranged to create a sense of privacy even when the restaurant was full. The opening date was set for December 15th, a Friday. It wasn't the most ideal time, considering the upcoming holidays, but Bryn insisted. She wanted to get some work done before Christmas and iron out all the kinks so that the restaurant would enter the new year with a reputation and a customer base already established. "The weeks leading up to Christmas are golden for restaurants," she explained. "Company parties, family dinners, old friends getting together. If we open in January, we'll miss out on that rush." I agreed, although I was worried that not everything would be ready in time. The staff had been hired and trained, the menu had been worked out down to the last detail, and the wine list had been compiled with the help of a consultant from Chicago. But there's always a risk that something will go wrong. A week before the opening, we launched our advertising campaign. Ads in the local newspaper, flyers, a banner on Kendallville's main street. But our trump card was the strategy that Bryn and I had come up with together. Personal invitations to influential residents of the town. The mayor, city council members, school principals, local business owners, and the editor of the newspaper all received elegant cards inviting them to the grand opening of Holloway. "Are you sure the mayor will come?" Bryn asked nervously. "He will," I replied confidently. "Jeffrey Hawkins was my 4th grade student. I know his mother. He wouldn't dare refuse." My confidence was confirmed when the mayor himself called to confirm his attendance. Others followed suit. By Wednesday, we had confirmations from most of the VIP guests. Kendallville was a small town, and the opening of a new restaurant was a big deal. "You're a genius, Eudora," said Bryn as we checked the guest list. "I never would have thought you were such a strategist." I smiled. Decades of teaching elementary school had taught me how to manage people better than any business course. especially in a small town where everyone knows each other and is connected by 1,000 invisible threads. I knew who was friends with who couldn't stand whose children I taught, whose parents were my colleagues. And I used that knowledge to its fullest. On opening day, I arrived at the restaurant early in the morning. Bryn was already there in the kitchen, supervising the final preparations. The staff bustled about, setting tables, wiping glasses, laying out cutlery. Florists delivered arrangements of fresh flowers, nothing fancy, just white lilies and greenery, elegant and tasteful. Everything had to be perfect. I walked around the room, checking every detail. At the entrance was a small stand with a guest book and a basket for business cards. On each table was a small card with the history of the restaurant's name and a story about Bryn's grandmother, Eleanor Holloway, whose recipes had inspired many of the dishes on the menu. It was a small touch, but important for creating the right atmosphere. "How are you?" I asked Bryn when she came out of the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. "I'm nervous," she admitted honestly. "But it's good nervous energy, like before an exam you've prepared well for." She looked beautiful in a simple black dress with a chef's apron over it. Her hair was pulled back, and she wore minimal makeup. Bryn wanted the guests to focus on the food, not her appearance. "Everything will be fine," I said, hugging her, surprising myself. "You deserve this success." "We deserve it," she corrected, returning the hug. "This is our project, Eudora. I'll never forget that without you, none of this would be possible." At 7 o'clock in the evening, the doors of Holloway opened to the first guests. A small crowd had already gathered outside, curious townspeople attracted by the advertising and rumors. Bryn and I stood at the entrance, greeting each guest personally. The mayor was one of the first to arrive, accompanied by his wife. He was followed by other VIPs. I saw the surprise on their faces as they entered the hall and discovered that Little Kendallville now had a restaurant that could rival those in Chicago or New York. The press was also present. A reporter and photographer from the local newspaper, a blogger from Fort Wayne who ran a page about restaurants in the region. I mentally checked off another item on my list. Another element of the plan had worked perfectly. The atmosphere in the room was lively. The clinking of glasses, quiet conversations, and background music all blended into a pleasant hum. Waiters glided between tables, serving appetizers and first courses. Bryn periodically emerged from the kitchen to greet special guests and talk about the concept behind the menu. I watched everything from my seat at a small table in the corner. My role was less visible, but no less important. I monitored the guests' reactions, noting which dishes were most popular and which wines were ordered most often. This information was valuable for future work. By 9 o'clock, the restaurant was full to capacity. We deliberately did not reserve all the tables, leaving a few for walk-ins, and it paid off. People kept coming, attracted by the light and excitement visible through Holloway's large windows. The mayor gave a short speech, congratulating us on the opening and noting that such establishments raise the prestige of Kendallville and attract tourists from neighboring towns. This was exactly what we had hoped for. Official recognition of our contribution to the life of the city. Around 10 o'clock, Melanie Watson, the editor of the local newspaper, approached me. "Congratulations, Eudora," she said, sitting down next to me. "What an amazing place. I never would have thought you'd take on a project like this at your age." Melanie had been my student long ago, and now, in her 40s, she still sometimes spoke to me in the tone of a diligent pupil. "Age is no barrier to new beginnings," I replied, "especially when you have such a talented partner as Bryn." "Yes, her cooking is impressive," Melanie said, taking a sip of wine. "But I must admit, many in town are surprised by your partnership. Considering the situation with Quentin," I looked at her directly. "What about Quentin?" Melanie looked slightly embarrassed. "Well, you know, he's your grandson and Bryn is his ex-wife. People say you took her side after their divorce." "I didn't take sides," I said firmly. "I just invested in a promising business. Bryn is talented. She had a great vision. She needed capital. I had capital. I needed to invest it. It was a purely business transaction." We both knew that wasn't the whole truth, but Melanie nodded, accepting my explanation. She was too good a journalist not to sense that there was something personal behind it, but tactful enough not to press. In any case, the result is impressive, she said, changing the subject. I'll write a detailed review for Sunday's edition, with photos. I'd appreciate it, I smiled. Another item on the agenda checked off. The evening continued. The guests enjoyed the food and the atmosphere, the waiters deftly handled the flow of orders, and the bartender mixed cocktails with showmanship worthy of a performance. Everything was going perfectly, even better than we could have hoped. Around 11, when the first wave of guests began to leave, I noticed a familiar figure entering the restaurant. Quentin. He was alone without a date, and looked sober, which was already a good sign. He stopped at the entrance, looking around the room, and his gaze settled on me. I had been anticipating this moment, preparing for it, but I still felt my heart begin to race. Quentin slowly made his way between the tables, heading toward me. I saw the heads of the other patrons turn to follow him. Many of them knew about our situation and were no doubt waiting for a scene. "Grandma," he said, stopping at my table. "Quentin," I nodded, trying to remain calm. "Did you decide to join the celebration?" He sat down across from me without invitation. "Not really, I came to talk." "Now's not the best time," I said, glancing around the crowded room. "We're opening, as you can see." "Yes, I can see that," he said, his voice tinged with bitterness. "Very impressive, especially considering you never showed any interest in the restaurant business when I opened my place." I sighed. "Quentin, let's not make a scene, not today." He looked at me for a long time, then nodded unexpectedly. "Okay, not today. But we need to talk, Grandma. Really talk." "I agree. Come see me tomorrow at 2:00. Quentin stood up. "I will, and congratulations on the opening. It's a really beautiful place." He left as suddenly as he had appeared, leaving me with mixed feelings. Part of me was glad he had come, that he was ready to talk. Another part was afraid of the confrontation that was coming. Bryn came over to my table a few minutes after Quentin left. "I saw him," she said quietly. "Are you okay?" "Yes," I nodded. "He wants to talk, tomorrow." She squeezed my shoulder in silent support and returned to the kitchen. I appreciated the gesture. Bryn had never interfered in my relationship with Quentin, even though it undoubtedly affected her as well. The rest of the evening passed without incident. By midnight, the last guest had left, leaving rave reviews in the guest book at the entrance. The staff began cleaning up, and Bryn and I sat down at the bar with glasses of champagne to celebrate the successful opening. "To Holloway," I said, raising my glass. "To us," Bryn added, clinking glasses with me. The next day, I got up later than usual, feeling a little tired after the previous evening. The house seemed especially quiet after the noise and excitement of the restaurant. I had a leisurely breakfast and looked through the morning paper, where a photo of Holloway was featured on the front page with a short announcement of a full article in the Sunday edition. Closer to 2, I began to prepare for Quentin's arrival. I put the kettle on and took out the cookies I had baked earlier in the week. It wasn't that I was trying to bribe my grandson with sweets, as I had done when he was a child, but part of me still wanted him to feel comfortable in my home. Quentin arrived right on time without any delays. I appreciated his punctuality, a small sign of respect. He looked composed and serious when I opened the door. There were no signs of a recent binge or aggression. "Come in," I said, gesturing toward the living room. "Tea is ready." We sat down at the table and I poured tea into the cups. We were silent for a while, as if neither of us knew how to start a difficult conversation. "So," Quentin finally said, "you're Bryn's business partner." "Yes." I saw no point in denying the obvious. "Why?" He looked at me directly, demanding an honest answer. I could have talked again about the promising business and Bryn's talents, but I decided to be honest. Quentin deserved the truth. "Because she deserves it. And because I wanted to show you that your actions have consequences." He frowned. "Is this because of what happened on your birthday?" I already apologized. I was drunk, upset. "No, you didn't apologize," I interrupted him. "You never called, you never came. And it's not just about the birthday, Quentin. It's about years of neglect, about how you treated Bryn, how you treated me, how you treated the whole family. You always thought the world revolved around you." Quentin looked stunned by my directness. "That's not fair," he said after a pause. "I did everything I could. I built this business from the ground up, without anyone's help. And did I ever ask for your help, once in all these years? No. All I asked for was respect. Respect for my home, for my birthday, for my feelings. And what did I get? Drunken insults and a shove that left me with a sore side for a week." I saw him flinch at those words. Good. Let him know that his actions hurt me, not just emotionally, but physically. "I didn't mean to push you," he said quietly. "It was an accident. I was very angry." "At Bryn," I finished for him. "You're always angry at Bryn, but you know what? She never said a bad word about you. Not even after the divorce. Not even when you spread rumors about her cafe." Quentin looked away. "I didn't spread rumors." "It doesn't matter. The point is that you took her desire to develop independently as a personal insult, as if she had no right to her own ambitions, to her own business." "That's not true," he objected, but without much conviction. "No? Then why did you get so angry when you found out about our partnership? If you really want her to succeed, shouldn't you be happy for her?" Quentin was silent, thinking about what I had said. I could see the struggle on his face. Part of him understood that I was right, but another part, stubborn and proud, refused to admit his mistakes. "You took her side," he finally said. "My grandmother was lured away by my ex-wife. How do you think I was supposed to take that?" "I didn't take sides, Quentin. I just stopped blindly supporting you when you started behaving inappropriately. Those are two different things." I paused, gathering my thoughts. What I was about to say next was important. "I loved you more than any of my grandchildren. You were special to me, sensitive, intelligent, with so much potential. I saw your grandfather in you, the same passion, the same drive for excellence. But in recent years, you've changed. You've become harsh, cynical, selfish. You started drinking too much. You started blaming everyone around you for your problems." Quentin listened without interrupting. I could see that my words were hurting him, but I continued. "All of this needed to be said a long time ago. When you married Bryn, I was so happy. She was exactly what you needed. Balanced, kind, with her own interests and ambitions. You could have built something beautiful together. But you couldn't accept that she wasn't going to live your life, your interests. You wanted her to be your shadow, and she wanted to be your partner." "It's more complicated than you think," Quentin objected, but without his previous conviction. "Maybe relationships are always complicated, but the point is that after your divorce, you started behaving disgracefully. You spread rumors, tried to undermine her business, turned the family against her. And when I didn't support your behavior, you took it as a betrayal." I took a sip of my cold tea. "And then there was my birthday, and your outburst, and how the whole family pretended nothing had happened when you pushed your 70-year-old grandmother so hard she fell." Quentin lowered his head. "I wasn't myself. I'm really sorry about that, Grandma." "I know, but regret isn't enough, Quentin. You need to take action, make changes. You need to take responsibility for your life, for your actions. Stop blaming others for your problems." We sat in silence for a while. I could see Quentin struggling with himself, with his pride, with the need to admit his mistakes. "What do you want from me?" he finally asked. "Nothing," I replied honestly. "I'm not doing this to make you do or say anything. I just want you to understand that actions have consequences. You can't behave like a spoiled child for years and expect everyone to put up with it." 6 months flew by. June was hot, and the air conditioners at Holloway were running at full blast, creating a pleasant coolness for visitors escaping the 30-degree heat. I sat at my usual table in the corner of the hall, reviewing the financial reports for the past month. The numbers were encouraging. We had shown steady revenue growth for the 5th month in a row. Expenses were also rising, but not as fast as revenues, which allowed us to gradually increase our profits. Bryn approached me during the break between lunch and dinner, when the restaurant was quiet. "What do you think?" she asked, nodding toward the documents. "Very good," I said, handing her the folder, "especially considering that summer isn't usually the best season for the restaurant business. People go on vacation, eat ice cream outside, and barbecue in their backyards. But not in this heat, Bryn smiled, flipping through the report. No one wants to stand over a grill when it's hot outside. Besides, we have the best summer cocktails in town. That was true. Our bartender Noah had created a special summer drink menu that attracted customers even on weekdays. The Mediterranean breeze, a refreshing mix of gin, basil, cucumber, and tonic, was especially popular. "How's Quentin doing?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Bryn sighed. "Not great. I walked by Prentice Grill yesterday. It was almost empty. Only 2 tables were taken, and that was on a Friday night." I nodded. Quentin's business had started to decline almost immediately after Holloway opened. At first, it was just a natural reaction from the townspeople to something new. Everyone wanted to try the food at the trendy new place. We expected the hype to die down after a month or two and some of the customers to return to their usual places. But that didn't happen. Holloway quickly earned a reputation as the best restaurant not only in Kendallville, but in the entire county. People came from neighboring towns specifically to dine with us. Bryn regularly updated the menu, adding seasonal dishes and special offers. We held themed evenings featuring Mediterranean cuisine from different regions, wine tastings, and cooking classes. Quentin, instead of adapting to the new competition, began to act according to the worst-case scenario. He lowered prices, which led to a decline in food quality. He fired some of the staff to cut costs, which slowed down service. He started offering 2 for the price of 1 promotions, which only attracted customers who were focused on quantity rather than quality. I watched this decline with mixed feelings. Part of me, the spiteful old woman who remembered every insult, every dismissive word, felt satisfaction. Justice had prevailed. Quentin was reaping the rewards of his arrogance and disrespect. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the little boy who came to me with scraped knees and his first culinary experiments, felt sad. I didn't want him to fail completely. I didn't want to destroy him. I just wanted him to understand that his actions had consequences. "It's his own fault," said Bryn as if reading my mind. Instead of improving his restaurant, raising the quality, looking for new ideas, he chose the path of least resistance. And now he's paying for it. "I know," I said, closing the folder with the reports. "But it's still painful to watch the business he built over the years fall apart before our eyes." Bryn shrugged. "That's life, Eudora. The strongest survive. There's no room for sentimentality in business." I looked at her in surprise. Bryn was usually softer, more sympathetic. But apparently, years of fighting with her ex-husband had hardened her. "Anyway," she continued, changing the subject, "I wanted to discuss an expansion idea with you. Remember we talked about the possibility of opening a summer terrace? I think now is the time. Summer is in full swing, and people love to dine outdoors." We immersed ourselves in discussing the details of the project, and thoughts of Quentin faded into the background. But not for long. A week after that conversation, the first incident occurred. In the morning, when the staff arrived to open the restaurant, they discovered that someone had broken one of the large windows at Holloway and scattered trash across the facade. The police arrived and filed a report, but without witnesses or surveillance cameras, it was difficult to find the culprit. "It's Quentin," Bryn said confidently as we surveyed the damage. "Who else could have done it?" I wasn't so sure. "We don't have any proof, Bryn. It could have been anyone. Teenagers, a drunk passerby, a random vandal." But 2 weeks later, a second incident occurred. This time, someone posted fake reviews of our restaurant on social media, claiming that several customers had food poisoning after dining at Holloway. The reviews were clearly fake, all from newly created accounts, with similar wording posted on the same day. We responded quickly, contacted the site administrators, provided evidence that it was fake, and most of the reviews were removed. But the damage was done. "Now do you believe it's Quentin?" Bryn asked as we discussed the situation. I had to admit that it looked suspicious. Only someone with a personal motive could have taken such targeted action against our business, and the circle of such people was limited. The third incident occurred a month later. Someone called the health department with an anonymous complaint about Holloway, claiming to have seen rats in the kitchen. The inspectors showed up unannounced, conducted a thorough inspection, and of course, found nothing. Our kitchen was always spotless. Bryn was obsessed with hygiene. But the very fact that the inspection had been noticed by visitors could damage the restaurant's reputation. This time, I decided to take action. Without consulting Bryn, I went to Prentice Grill on a quiet Tuesday evening. Quentin's restaurant was almost empty. Only 3 tables were occupied, and the bartender was bored behind the bar, scrolling through his phone. I walked straight into the kitchen, where I found my grandson at the stove, cooking something on the grill. "Grandma?" He looked surprised and a little embarrassed. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk," I said, not wasting time on greetings. "Alone." Quentin nodded to the sous chef to take over the grill and led me into his office, a small room behind the kitchen, cluttered with papers and boxes. "Sorry about the mess," he muttered, pulling out a chair for me. "I wasn't expecting guests." I sat down, watching my grandson closely. He looked tired and haggard. Dark circles had formed under his eyes, and stubble had appeared on his cheeks, which he had always shaved carefully before. His chef's jacket, once snow white, now looked grayish from numerous washings. "This is you?" I said without preamble. "The broken window, the fake reviews, the complaint to the health inspector. It's all you're doing." Quentin didn't deny it. He just looked at me with a mixture of defiance and despair in his eyes. "I'm going bankrupt, Grandma," he said finally. "Another couple of months and I'll have to close the restaurant. That's what you wanted, isn't it? My complete ruin?" "No," I shook my head. "I never wanted you to fail. I wanted you to understand that you can't treat people the way you treated Bryn, me, everyone around you. That you can't expect the world to revolve around you. And to do that, you had to destroy my life's work?" His voice was bitter. "I didn't ruin your business, Quentin. I just helped another business grow. Your customers chose Holloway because of the quality of the food and service. You chose to hurt our restaurant instead of improving your own, and now you're paying the price." Quentin lowered his eyes. "I know I acted foolishly, but I was desperate. Seeing everything I'd built over the years crumble because of competition," I finished for him. "It's business, Quentin. Nothing personal." He smiled bitterly. "Nothing personal? You financed my ex-wife's restaurant to get back at me for what happened on your birthday. How can that be nothing personal?" I didn't deny it. Yes, there was a personal element at first. I was hurt, angry. But over time, it grew into something more. I saw a talent in Bryn that you always underestimated. I saw an opportunity to create something beautiful that would outlive me. And I did it. We sat in silence for a while. Muffled sounds of work came from the kitchen. The clatter of knives, the hiss of the grill, the quiet voices of the staff. Once, these sounds filled Prentice Grill with energy and life. Now they seemed like echoes of a former bustle. "What should I do, Grandma?" Quentin finally asked, and in his voice I heard the little boy who used to come to me for advice when he didn't know what to do. "I've tried to compete, tried to bring customers back, but nothing works. I'm on the verge of bankruptcy." "Stop hurting Holloway," I said firmly. "That's number 1. Not only is it illegal, it's pointless. You're just damaging your reputation." Quentin nodded. "And number 2? Number 2, you need to decide if you really want to save this restaurant, or maybe it's time to move on." "What do you mean?" "I mean that sometimes you have to admit defeat in order to start something new. You're young, talented, you have your whole life ahead of you. Maybe this is your chance to start with a clean slate, somewhere else, with different people, with new ideas." Quentin looked shaken. "You're suggesting I just give it all up, after all these years?" "I'm suggesting you consider all your options," I replied, "including selling the restaurant while it's still worth something. Use the money to start a new project, maybe in another city where there's not so much competition." He was silent, thinking about what I had said. I could see different emotions fighting in his eyes: despair, anger, resignation, hope. "I can help you with the money," I said, surprising myself. "Not to save this restaurant, but for a new start. If you really decide to move on." "You'll give me money?" Quentin looked incredulous. "After everything that's happened?" I'm your grandmother, Quentin, no matter what. And I want you to be happy and successful. I'm just not willing to support your disrespectful attitude toward others and yourself anymore. He nodded, accepting my terms. I'll think about what you said, honestly. With that, we parted ways. I left Prentice Grill with a heavy heart, but confident that I had done the right thing. Sometimes you have to be tough with the ones you love to help them see the truth. 2 days later, Quentin called me. His voice sounded unusually calm and determined. I found a buyer for the restaurant, he said without preamble. A couple from Fort Wayne wants to open a Mexican bistro here. They offered a good price, considering the circumstances. I'm glad, I replied sincerely. I think it's the right decision. And there's more, he continued after a pause. I've been offered a job in Chicago, assistant chef at a new restaurant. It's not the highest position, but it's a good place to start over. That's great news, Quentin. Yeah, I think so too. Starting with a clean slate without all that baggage. No more comparisons to Holloway, no more running into Bryn at the supermarket, no more whispering behind my back. I heard something in his voice that I hadn't heard in a long time, hope, and it warmed my old heart more than I expected. When are you leaving? I asked. In 2 weeks. First, I have to finalize the sale of the restaurant, take care of all the formalities, then pack my things and find an apartment in Chicago. Come by before you leave, I said. I'll bake your favorite apple pie. I will, Grandma. The sale of Prentice Grill went quickly and smoothly. The new owners were an energetic couple in their 30s with a clear vision of what they wanted to do with the place. Mexican cuisine was new to Kendallville, and they had every chance of success. Quentin stopped by the day before I left for Chicago. We spent the evening eating apple pie and reminiscing. Not about recent conflicts, but about the good times, his childhood, his grandfather, his first culinary experiments. It was an evening of reconciliation, though neither of us said the word. I'll come visit you, he said as he left. I promise. I nodded, not really believing the promise, but appreciating the gesture. Good luck in Chicago, Quentin. I hope you find what you're looking for. After he left, I felt a strange emptiness. The revenge that had driven me for so long had lost its power. Quentin was gone, starting a new life. Prentice Grill no longer existed. Justice had been served, but I felt no joy. You look pensive, Bryn remarked when I arrived at the restaurant the next day. Something happened? Quentin left for Chicago, I replied. He sold the restaurant and is starting over. Bryn nodded. I heard. I think it's for the best. He needed a shake-up to move on. Maybe, but I feel strange, like I've come to the end of a long road and don't know where to go next. Bryn smiled. We've got plenty of directions, Eudora. The summer terrace we've been talking about, the possibility of opening a second location in Fort Wayne, the cooking classes we're planning to launch in the fall. The journey's just beginning. I looked at her gratefully. Bryn was right. We had so many plans, so many ideas. Holloway was thriving, becoming more and more popular not only in Kendallville, but throughout the county. We had created something worthwhile, something to be proud of. That evening, sitting at my usual table in the corner of the dining room, watching the restaurant fill up, watching Bryn come out of the kitchen to greet regular customers, watching the waiters deftly glide between tables laden with exquisite dishes, I felt a strange sense of peace. My revenge had borne unexpected fruit. Instead of simple satisfaction at punishing my grandson, I had found a new purpose in life, a new family in Bryn, and a new legacy in the form of a thriving business. And Quentin, perhaps, had been given a chance to become a better man, to rethink his mistakes and start over. Life went on, and contrary to all expectations at 71, I felt not like I was in the twilight of my life, but in the prime of a new chapter. A week later, I received a letter from Quentin. Inside was a check for the amount I had once lent him to open Prentice Grill, money I never expected to see again, and a short note. This is the last debt I had to repay. Now I am free to start over. Thanks for the lesson, Grandma. It was tough, but necessary. Quentin. I stared at the check for a long time, then slowly tore it into tiny pieces. That money was never a debt. It was an investment in my grandson, in his future. And the fact that he had decided to return it meant that he had finally begun to understand the value of responsibility and honesty. Perhaps in the end, my revenge had turned out to be not destructive, but constructive for all of us.